Welcome to the 10th video in this review of basic Greek morphology based on 12 core patterns. We now finish our review of the secondary tenses in the indicative by looking at the imperfect and the pluperfect. These tense forms continue to use the same core pattern for the personal endings. The imperfect tense form is built on the first principal part, so it's the same as the present. Notice this one form has an active and then a middle passive form, just like the present. The imperfect indicative has an augment, and it uses the variable vowels omicron and epsilon. As we saw in the second aorist in the last video, the second singular middle, when the ending sigma omicron is added to the variable vowel epsilon, the sigma drops out, and the vowels epsilon and omicron contract to produce omicron upsilon. But that's included in the core pattern itself, so you have that built in. So the personal endings are straightforward with no changes from the core pattern. Looking now at the contract forms, you see that they use the same personal endings, but the contraction of the stem ending alpha and the ending omicron upsilon in the second singular of the middle passive obscures the omicron upsilon ending. These stem endings are contracting with the omicron epsilon variable vowels, so you should study carefully the effects of the rules of contraction. And several of the forms will probably give you no difficulty, so pay attention to the forms you think you might have a hard time identifying when you see them in a text. You can take the same approach to the me verbs. The endings of me verbs follow the regular personal endings in the core pattern. Several of the forms will probably give you no difficulty, so pay attention to the ones that you think you will have a hard time recognizing in a text. The imperfect indicative pattern of a me has some irregularities, so it's one of the 12 core patterns to learn. Now let's look at the pluperfect active. The pluperfect active is built on the fourth principal part, so it has reduplication, but also an augment added to that perfect stem with reduplication. The tense form sign is kappa epsilon iota, and that distinguishes the pluperfect active. The second pluperfect simply lacks the kappa in the tense form sign. You see there's no difficulties here in the endings if you know the core pattern. In the pluperfect middle and passive, we have the same ingredients as we just saw in the pluperfect active, and now with the middle passive endings, of course. And this form is built on the fifth principal part. So now we've completed our review of the secondary tense forms in the indicative. As you go through each of these paradigms, notice how the core pattern covers the endings with very few modifications. So let's now apply this to a few examples in some passages. Once again, I invite you to pause the video and see if you can recognize the verbs tense form, person, number, and voice, and also take a stab at getting back to the lemma. So see what you can do with elegon. We see the augment and the ending that suggests an imperfect or second aorist. The stem is lambda epsilon gamma. So we either already recognize or will find in a lexicon that the verb is lego, and that means that we have an imperfect tense form here. And it can either be first singular or third plural. And here the nominative tenes points to a third plural form. Now try one a little bit more challenging. Our ending here is a zero form with the epsilon variable vowel and a movable nu. So this is a third singular active form, and the eta is an augment. The lemma is praago. Since this is the same stem as the present, this will be an imperfect, with that alpha lengthened for the augment. Here's our next word to try. Here we have an ending that's a zero form with the variable vowel epsilon iota, so this is another third singular active. It could be a present, but the epsilon in the middle looks like an augment, and when you check the lexicon you find proskuneo. So what we have here is an imperfect tense form, and the epsilon variable vowel has contracted with the epsilon ending in the stem to produce epsilon iota. Now try this word. Here you see what looks like an augment on the front, and that omicron upsilon nu ending can be a contracted form from an epsilon and omicron, and the stem looks like it could be a first principal part. We'll have to check the lexicon, and we find that that's the case. So we have an epsilon contract verb. So we have the new ending, which can either be a first singular or a third plural. And the nominative polloi points us to the third plural. So we have an imperfect third plural active. Here's one final example to try. Well, let's start with the ending. It's that son ending, so that's a third plural active. And you see the kappa epsilon iota, that's the tense form sign that points to a pluperfect. The augment and the reduplication of the pluperfect don't show up very clearly on this form, but checking Danker or Newman's lexicons, we find help. So our form is a pluperfect from histemi. As you keep reading in Greek, you'll get familiar with some of these stranger forms. And in the meantime, the resources like Danker and Newman and others that I mentioned in using and enjoying biblical Greek will help you make sense out of things as you go. So here's a summary of what we've seen in these two videos on the secondary tense forms. We've seen a core pattern that gives us the person, number, and voice, and we've looked at the signs for the secondary tense forms. Learning the ingredients that go into the different tense forms is an important part of basic Greek, and one of the core patterns is a composite chart showing the elements that make up each of the tenses. Some people memorize the chart, but many find the chart more useful as a list of ingredients which they use for reference, learning the signs of the tense forms as they continue to see them in text. Either way, this is the data you need to get familiar with, whether you memorize it by rote, pick it up as you go, or some combination. That concludes our survey for the indicative. In the next video, we go on to the non-indicative moods.